Well, it is a huge news day in the Ukraine conflict. First, we have, of course, the Ukrainian decision to withdraw from Krasna Hora. This is something that I've been talking about for probably the better part of a week now. No surprises there. The big surprise, though, where I got it way wrong, is apparently the Nord Stream pipeline. Not only is it now being reported that it was a U.S. covert intelligence operation, but there's also even more layers to this that we are going to unpack. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's February 12th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first let's cover the map. Biggest change here is, of course, the withdrawal from Krasna Hora. This is reporting that Ukrainian forces have completed their withdrawal. This is an event that really absolutely should have been planned probably for the better part of a week, ever since really the whole area was under threat of Russian encirclement. And as you guys can see, there's still a significant threat of Russian encirclement here in Pereskoriva. You also, of course, have reportedly Russian forces really trying to push hard into Bakhmut, as well as into Ivansky and Chasiv Yar. You can see here, it seems like the tactical problem of breaking apart this little tripartite defensive line here is still an unsolved problem by Russia. You can see they haven't really made any advances across these open fields or into the woodlands of Chasiv Yar. But that doesn't stop them, of course, from trying to advance from the south, east, and now the north into Bakhmut. And as you guys can probably see, there's really two routes that still remain clear, primarily this one into Chasiv Yar here, to a lesser extent, this north-south into Bakhmut. But I think it's fair to say that there's really just one route that remains clear, which, you know, in light infantry combat and urban combat, that can be all you need. One good, really secure route. You also, of course, have this less secure route here along Ivansky, but it's not the end of the world. And when we look over at the combat map, you guys can see that Russia is really pushing in a number of different fronts, which, again, as a Western doctrine-trained officer, this is preposterous to me, right? We value our economy of force so much, and the decisiveness of our offensive operations. When you're subject to a well-planned and well-executed NATO offensive operation, we want to maintain the initiative. We never want our enemies to be able to react to us faster than we can make decisions and iterate. Russia just operates differently. Here you can see them trying to push into Volodar. If you've been on the Patreon, you know we've done a breakdown of the viral video of this attack, and we can see why it's so ineffective. Just the caliber of troop being used. There's really, as we've talked about, Volodar is not a good defensible position. You can see that it's surrounded by these big open areas that light infantry forces would be really vulnerable in. The problem is, of course, it's also sort of an advantage. It's a little bit like the medieval, city on a hill fortifications, where you can't leave, but you also really can't sustain a siege for very long. And that's sort of the Russian problem here. They have to cross these big open territories to get to Volodar, and they get punished along the way. So, no progress there. You could see they're continuing to try to push out from Donetsk. Again, I think of this as the DNR and LNR efforts, where they really do struggle somewhat to make significant gains. You can see here, of course, Krasna Hora, Bakhmut, Soledar, they're really trying to get the whole region around here. Interestingly, it's reporting that, again, this bridge here was destroyed. It's not clear. It just says that it was blown up, but it's not clear who. I would suspect the Russians, probably because they want to do their absolute best to deny use of this route into Bakhmut. The more, as we've talked about, the thinner and more tight you can get Ukrainian supply lines, the better the Russians are going to feel. But it's also possible that this is a function of Ukrainian forces attempting to further deny Russians access into Chasiv Yar. I think it would be, as hard as Bakhmut has been to take, Chasiv Yar would be comparably bad. You can just see on the map that the water formations form all these natural choke points that are going to be really hard. It's a mix of forested areas, which we know are very effective areas to conduct defensive operations in, to build trenches, right? Lots of natural materials. You have urban areas, which, again, as we've seen in Bakhmut, very hard to clear. This is just a nightmarish tactical problem for Russian forces who are on the offense, especially given that they don't actually control Bakhmut. They don't want to have to take Chasiv Yar. They want to just sever this H-32 if they can. You can see this. This is showing the midpoint of the Krasna Hora withdrawal, that they're going to close this salient at least, and then try probably to maintain this railway as sort of a defensive line, and probably the MO3 highway is another defensive line. That's probably what I would expect to see Ukrainians attempt to do. It can be really effective to build your defensive lines here, even if there's not cover. Just being able to use this highway as a way to transit supplies and soldiers, reinforce different areas of the front that are under attack, that can be effective in and of itself. And most significantly, we see that the opening of this last sort of assault area for Russian forces, right, is this Kreminna-Lyman line. You can see they're continuing to push across this line as well. But their gains really not that significant. So interestingly, you can see on War Mapper, they're pointing out that Russian forces are also, again, taking, just building by building, the Bakhmut area, which is fine, honestly. Again, we've talked about the defense in depth ad nauseum. But let's talk about something that I find even stranger, even more bizarre. And this is reporting by Seymour Hersh. Now, I want you guys to understand, if you're not a U.S. history buff, is that Seymour Hersh is a extremely highly regarded journalist in the United States. I mean, we can see his Wikipedia entry. One, he's about 85 years old, but still going strong. He is famous for reporting truly and accurately many instances that the U.S. government tried to cover up. It's sort of his specialty, right? His ability to source these stories, even when the government doesn't want them. He reported in 1969 the government's cover-up of the My Lai massacre, in which hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians were murdered by U.S. soldiers in one of the worst war crimes, maybe the worst war crime of the Vietnam War. It got him put on an NSA watch list. He also reported, of course, Project Jennifer, a project to recover a Soviet Navy submarine from the floor of the Pacific Ocean. This was extremely elaborate. And interestingly, this ran in the New York Times. I don't know where the My Lai massacre story was first published. Right, it talks. He covered the Soviet Union's incompetence in shooting down the Korean Air Flight 007. All of these are accurate stories. He also, of course, published the first coverage of the Abu Ghraib abuse in Iraq. This is really, it's hard to understate how much this publication changed not just the public's perception of the war, but also, more importantly, the Iraqis' perception of the Americans. It basically validated everything that they had believed, that the Americans were out to dehumanize Muslims, abuse Iraqis wantonly, and, of course, it identified the CIA as being culpable in torture and interrogation of prisoners. he identified down to the name of who was part of the secret interrogation program. And just really, it's hard to understate how much important reporting Seymour Hersh has done on especially issues that the government wants kept secret. And he continued, 2015, he published a 10,000 word article in the London Review of Books on the Operation Neptune Spear, the efforts to eliminate Osama bin Laden. And again, it seems like he more or less got it right. And so it's important to acknowledge that this is not like patriotnews.net. Obviously he gets some things wrong. A lot of people are critical that he reliably, when he says he will keep his sources anonymous, he does it. And it's tough to he's just a skeptic, but he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He's won so many awards for investigative reporting, won an award for integrity. Okay, so you have to understand what this isn't. This isn't patriotnews.net. This isn't some fly-by-night reporting. One, it should tell you how something about the state of American media, that he has to publish this groundbreaking story in his own Substack, that he couldn't get not one publication to run it themselves, which is preposterous. And here's what's also weird, and we're going to break down the story in a minute, but when you search for something basic, Seymour Hersh, Nord Stream, you can see that the top claim here is that, again, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, they call it a conspiracy, and it's held together by, I use this word, a seemingly omnipotent anonymous source. It's not omnipotent. That's not even the correct word. It's omniscient is the criticism they're trying to levy. But you would think that, again, a reputable journalist who has multiple Pulitzer Prizes and a long track record of accurate reporting would not necessarily be called a conspiracy theorist, and that the first result wouldn't be identifying this as a conspiracy theory. But look, where's the actual reliable news on this? Like, this is what's crazy to me. Look, Business Insider, Democracy Now!, a Chinese mouthpiece, even Reuters is reporting what the Kremlin says about this, but not the actual story itself, right? Here's his own Substack. But like the New York Post, that's it. That's the only major American media outlet willing to run this story. This is madness. Where's the New York Times? Where's the Washington Post? Where are they? Like, these are the major American media outlets. So anyway, the point is, when I talk about how important it is for me to be unbiased and to not do things that compromise my integrity so I can report these things, this is what I'm talking about. This is the stuff that, like, we just miss, Anyway, let's talk about this. Let's give you guys a summary. And I'm going to link to this in the description because, again, this dude's a legend and you should read his reporting, but I'm going to give you my insights as to why I believe him. Okay. New York Times called it a mystery how the Nord Stream exploded. And I honestly thought that this would be so reckless and so stupid by the United States and infuriate so many of our allies that I really believed Russia did it. And I thought they did it actually to spike the price of natural gas because they had gotten back deals inked with places like India and China. And so knew who they were going to sell their gas to, and it wasn't Europe, and they wanted to spike natural gas prices. And so they said, okay, well, we're going to destroy this non-functioning pipeline in order to spike natural gas prices because we were never going to sell gas along it anyway. That was my theory, and it was trying to punish his allies because for a time it looked like that was Russia's strategy, to punish Europe and make the European public feel the pain of the Ukraine conflict. That was my theory. But Seymour Hersh, this is a very, very credible reporting. First, I think the source is actually within this U.S. Navy Diving and Salvage Center, because you notice these guys are treated like the badasses they are. Don't kid yourself. Deep sea diving is the domain of the badass. And I say this as somebody who's done some hobbyist diving. But let's talk a little more about it. So basically, his argument is this, that last June, Navy divers from this dive center, under cover of an exercise called Bolt Ops 2, collaborating with the Norwegian military, Norwegian Navy, planted 2 remote C4 explosives on the pipelines. And it was, of course, a part of the... it was originally supposed to be a totally covert operation, and that it would be not tied to the U.S. at all, because the U.S. correctly identified that this would be a recklessly dangerous escalation of the conflict, putting Russia and the United States much closer to direct conflict. And that this, and I agree, I think this was not worth it, that the U.S. could have absolutely achieved the same effect politically by offering, for example, to use U.S. natural gas to sell to Germany and say, hey, we will actually do some level of price cut if you promise not to use the Nord Stream pipeline, for the duration of the conflict, right? This, of course, Washington hated Nord Stream 1. They hated Nord Stream 2. They saw it as, they correctly identified that it was empowering a U.S. geopolitical rival in Putin, giving Putin leverage over Germany, and that the Biden administration backed away from its. This is not important. It's important. You should read it, but it's context. Here's the thing. The reason I believe it is because of a couple of little details. First, the bureaucratic decision-making looks exactly like you would expect from real government bureaucracies. And I know I spent 7 years in the Department of Homeland Security, sometimes looking at decision-making at the secretarial level. So I can tell you that this all smells right. It smells like government decision makings, working groups of an intelligence advisory board, workshopping plans to deliver to secretarial level decision making. Also, some of the groupthink that happened. This all seems exactly right. Talks about there's also some history of this, but it really talks about the technical problem solving that had to happen, that how tough it is to work out some of these deals with Norway and even to a lesser extent Sweden, planting the C4 charges themselves. But it's great reporting, and it smells correct to me. The president sort of coming up with last minute changes to the plan. Yeah, 100%. 100%. But here's what's weird. A couple of things. First, reportedly, the CIA was furious when President Biden himself said, I want to be very clear to you today. This was Undersecretary Victoria Nuland, who said, I want to be very clear to you today, she said. If Russia invades Ukraine one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward. Weird. And on February 7th, so a little more than a year ago, Biden, talked to Olaf Scholz, who, after some wavering, was on the American team. And in the press briefing that followed, Biden said, quote, if Russia invades, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. And apparently this infuriated the intelligence establishment, who were like, listen, the whole point of this was that the U.S. doesn't get linked to this. We achieve this thing that I guess we want to do. So I think cooler heads needed to prevail on this. I think it was really stupid. But this is because it changed, because the president sort of announced he was doing it. It went from a covert operation requiring that Congress be informed, because as you guys know, Congress is the leakiest organization ever created, mostly because it's staffed by waitresses and con men of various stripes, and can't really be trusted at all. But now it actually, because he sort of announced it, it changed the legal status that it was just now a regular top secret military operation, because I guess everyone had just been briefed that it was happening. So they run this operation. They take out the Nord Stream pipeline with Norway's cooperation. And then, of course, afterward, people like Blinken are like, oh, this was great. This was wonderful. It's so weird. And the source, of course, talks about the fact that it's a beautiful cover story, that it was Russia that did it. The only flaw was the decision to do it. So anyway, guys, really, I'm going to link to this. You should check it out. And I hope this also, incidentally, helps you understand, one, how hard it is to get really accurate facts on this war, and two, why I'm so obsessed, sometimes to a fault, with neutrality. Because, damn, I'm shocked that major U.S. news outlets are ignoring this one. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. If you want to support what I'm doing, check out the Patreon. We do all these breakdowns on it. Every week I drop a new video. This week we did a viral video coming out of Volodar of Russian troops panicking under fire. It went viral on Russian social media. I break down everything that's wrong with it. And we do a bunch of other videos too. So anyway, thanks so much, of course, to our Colonel and Lieutenant tier patrons, especially Thomas McLeod, our Colonel tier patron. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.